Hello and welcome to this session of Talking Tech, Women and Girls in ICT. My name is Margo Williams, and today I'm delighted to be having a discussion about tech and tech careers with interviewee Ms. Inbal Arieli of the Chutzpah Center and of Synthesis. Talking Tech is a series celebrating girls and women in tech. It's being recorded around the world between Girls in ICT Day 2020 and Girls in ICT Day 2022. Girls in ICT Day is an international day marked on the fourth Thursday of each April. The objective is to help create a global environment that encourages young women to consider studies and careers in the field of ICT, information and communication technologies. The Talking Tech series is brought to you by the ITU, UNICC, and the UN Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, and is in support of Equals, the global partnership for gender equality in the digital age. Hi, Inbal, thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Margo.
To kick things off, would you mind introducing yourself a little bit to our audience and speaking about what your current jobs include?
Sure, so pleasure to be here and congratulations on this great project.
Thank you, it's wonderful.
I'm based in Tel Aviv, so you're now in my office if you want in Tel Aviv. And my entire career has been in the Israeli tech ecosystem, starting as a general counsel. So by profession, if you want, originally I'm a lawyer. And for the first decade of my career, I served as general counsel to a variety of Israeli tech companies. But since 2010, so for the past 13 years, I've actually immersed myself into both investment in tech and also fostering in general early stage entrepreneurship in technology and innovation throughout a variety of different vehicles. So I founded Israel's first startup accelerator. I have, like you said, a company called Synthesis that I founded, which provides leadership assessment to C-level executives in growth tech companies. And I'm also an investor in an investment firm called BIGIL, which invests in early stage Israeli tech companies. In addition to that, I'm also the proud mom of 3 Israeli boys, some of which are actually relatively close to your age. So I'm excited towards this conversation.
Yeah, it's an exciting time, definitely. Could you speak actually a little bit more about what your work at Synthesis looks like? I'm curious what sort of leadership advising entails. It sounds like a really cool project.
Sure. So let's reverse engineer a little bit. What is Synthesis and why I founded Synthesis? As part of my involvement with tech companies, and definitely and specifically investment in tech companies, there's this general saying that it's all about the team, right? It's all about the people. And we hear that a lot from a variety of investors at different stages, but not a lot of them actually act with that notion in mind. And what does it mean it's all about the team? So when I started investing some 14 years ago, I realized that I did not find the right tools to assess the individuals comprising of the founding teams or the executive teams. And that actually, and it's not that there are not enough tools out there. There are different types of assessment methodologies and different types of assessment tools that already exist that are extremely validated. But I did not find the ones that really fit my philosophy and my way of looking at an individual. And the reason is, and this is all background that will explain what we do at Synthesis. The reason is that before starting my professional career, like most Israelis, I served in the Israeli military. So in Israel, we have a mandatory conscription to the military, where at the age of 18, most of us join for a period of about 3 years, men and women, right after high school. We join the military in a variety of positions and roles. And this is the professional, people that actually comprise of the Israeli military. That means that at the age of about 16 and a half, 17, Israeli teenagers are being screened to fit different positions in the Israeli military. In my case, I was chosen to be screened and selected to be part of an intel unit, okay? But it could be any profession and any position in the military. Now, at the age of 16 and a half, I'm sure you remember, or 17, you don't really understand what it means. You're not really interested in it. And you definitely don't have the CV, right? Or the credentials that are relevant to becoming, an intelligence professional, for example, or a pilot, or whatever the role is. So the Israeli military has developed, because of that need, to screen the talent in a very efficient way and based on very limited information, but to make the optimal fit between a 17-year-old boy or a girl and the next 3 years of their actual, contribution to the military, has developed very unique methodologies and mindsets towards assessment.
Okay.
Now, combine that experience of mine from within the military and the unit where I served, and then my view in the business world of the lack of really having this tool that more than anything focuses on the potential of an individual rather than their past accomplishments. And this is how Synthesis was born. So Synthesis provides leadership assessment that relates to the core capabilities and personality traits of an individual, but trying to assess their potential rather than understanding what they did in the past and how we can learn from what they've accomplished to their future.
So technically speaking, does that look like a series of personality tests, or sitting in on calls to see what the collaboration methods look like, or is it a bunch of different things all put together?
So technically speaking, it's actually super simple. It's a list, it's a set of open-ended questions, very similar to what you and I are doing now in a sense, but in terms of the questions, okay? But there's a clear set of set questions that we ask. But it's based on narrative psychology, on how a person portrays a story, answers actually the questions. Now, these questions have no right or wrong answers, but by the way you actually answer and the story that you tell, are psychologists, and then we have psychologists that actually review the text that you wrote. It's not an in-person interview. It's not an in-person meeting, because one of the things that we want to do is actually to reduce biases. So once you see me on a call, on an interview, or definitely in a meeting, the first 5 seconds, you make some assumptions about me. The way I look, the way I speak, right? A lot of things. We want to actually minimize those biases. And that is done by actually not sharing with our psychologists anything about those individuals, except for what they actually tell about themselves, answering our questions. So the most extreme example is that our psychologists don't even know sometimes if it's a man or a woman, or their age, or where they went to university, or what they did in the past, or who their parents were. Unless they share that information. And then the question is not the actual data, but why are they sharing that specific piece of information?
Interesting. So the leader will take this assessment, and then the psychologists sort of extrapolate the information from it. And then what does the leader, I'm curious, get in return?
They would get an assessment, a report, okay, that portrays and focuses on few elements in their personality. Generally speaking, it would focus on 3 layers, if you want. The first layer is how you as an individual interact with yourself in a way, and that tells a lot about your maturity and your ability to grow. Okay, that's the very core element that is key for self-development. Then the second layer would be your dynamics with people around you, your team, your colleagues, your siblings, your friends. Okay, whomever is the close the closest circle around you. And that tells a lot about your emotional intelligence and your executive presence, charisma, and other elements. And then the third layer, as we distance from the inner to the outer world, is your dynamics with the world, which is out of your control. So things that are out there. And that actually tells us a lot about your capability as an individual to deal with ambiguity and uncertainty, which in our view is key and critical to definitely to our times, but generally speaking to executives in growth companies.
Well, it seems like this feedback is very tailored and very specific to individual clients. Just given the platform that we're on right now, I'm wondering if you have any sort of advice to up and coming tech startups for anywhere around the world, and then also whether you have any advice to female-led tech startups specifically. I just think that'd be an interesting thing to know.
So, well, I can speak for hours with all the lessons learned that I've seen for startups, but here's the one thing I would say: always remember that it is all about people on all sides. So not just at the startup level, but also the clients or the investors or your strategic partners. Eventually, these are individuals. The way they woke up in the morning, the night before influences the way they behave the following day. There are so many things influence on how they approach whatever the dynamic is. And I think once you really realize that everything eventually is done with people and decisions are made and taken between people, and human beings share a lot of universal traits and behaviors, regardless of the fact that I'm in Tel Aviv and you're in New York and someone else could be in Geneva or in Rwanda or in Japan. We do share some commonalities as human beings. And those universal elements, I think, are key to creating some sort of reliance, some sort of connection. So my first and foremost advice would be to remember that there are always people just like you on the other side, whatever that other side is. Right. And for female-led startups or for female, executives, I know what worked for me. I can speak only for myself, right? What worked for me was actually not to think of myself first and foremost as a woman. I'm a collection of different things, right? So today I'm a mother, and I'm also an investor, and I'm an author, and an executive, and a friend, and I'm also a daughter. I have short hair and brown eyes, and I'm also a woman. It's a lot of things together. And I actually am very careful in letting one of these elements to define me more than the others. And I think that when you think of yourself as this combination of a lot of things, it kind of reduces the weight that you need to put on one of them. So yes, of course, I am a woman, and I've always been a female executive, a female investor, but does this need to define my entire behavior? No. Right. I don't even know what that means to define my entire self through that prisma. Right.
Makes sense. So segueing from that a little bit, why is technology the sector so you mentioned being in an intel unit in the special forces. I'm curious why ICTs and sort of the tech sector, is it the sort of psychology, there are other people on the other side, and we have these things in common sort of aspect of ICTs that drew you to it and helped you fall in love with technology as an innovating force? Or is there something else that drew you to technology?
So originally what drew me to technology was actually when I was younger, when I was 18 and I joined the military, I used technology disruptive, innovative, breakthrough technology. And that by itself really inspired me, okay, to see what you can actually achieve if human beings join forces with technology. And that really, really inspired me. I think that today, even more so. So two main reasons I would give here. One is, and that is also universal. One is the fact that today technology is all around us, everywhere, okay? And with everything we do, from education to cyber and fintech, and through food, right, and agriculture and energy, and retail, I mean, anything you can think of, technology plays a part in it, because we've reached that point in humanity where we understand the force multiplier using technology. So that's one thing.
Right.
But when we think of the future of the world, okay, and the role specifically for women, in that, the lack or the underrepresentation, okay, the underrepresentation of women in technological innovation today, and investment in technology, will actually influence the way we shape the world in the future.
Right.
So I think it's critical today that we make sure, not just us women, but everyone makes sure, men and women, that women's voice, the women's angle, is actually, spoken loud and heard as we design new technologies that will influence the future of humanity. But that 50% needs to be represented there, because otherwise the solutions will lack a very, major part of the human base.
Right. Right. Makes total sense. I agree. You have this great book called Chutzpah. Why did you decide to write it? Does it coincide with this vision of women getting more involved in the tech space? The sort of chutzpah to create sort of out of the box solutions to problems? Is there sort of a gender slant to that understanding that you have? And then also, what do you hope readers will take away from the book?
So that's Hootsbo. And behind me, you can see Chutzpah in a variety of languages to which it was already translated. And the book actually, so why did I write the book? Let's first say why I wrote the book. So Israel is world known as the startup nation. And for many years already, different economies around the world have realized that something special has happened in Israel in terms of the size of the country, and what the age of the country, I mean, the development of the country, and the fact that it has been able to create such a successful, world-leading innovation hub. Okay, and most of the reasons given were around macro elements. So the role that the government of Israel played in strategizing this, the fact that Israel is a country of a lot of immigrants, and immigrants are entrepreneurs, the role that the military plays in Israel, just like we said before, in technology. But I always felt, as an Israeli that also grew abroad, so I have like different perspectives. I felt that something was missing, because we're not born 18. And it's not like a magical moment that happens, once you join the military, boom, you become this innovator in technology. And so I was asking myself the same question. On one of my speaking events in the US, actually, when asked the question, I said, you know what, I'll give you a surprising answer. And I shared the daily life of my children back then, so about 10 years ago, in Israel, what it means to be a 10-year-old in Israel. Coming off stage, people started asking me a lot of questions and said, wow, this is really refreshing, this perspective. And then I realized that there's something very interesting here, that the fact, if you look at how children actually evolve, again, anywhere in the world, and this is a key element of my thesis. So although Chutzpah is a book about Israel, it's actually a book about Israeli childhood, but it's a book about children in general. And if you think about, a 1.5-year toddler, again, in Japan, in Israel, anywhere in the world, okay? They learn to walk the same way. They ask a lot of questions, right? And organize the world through asking questions and getting responses. They're very creative children. They are very proactive, even physically. They move a lot, right? And so understanding these commonalities around children, but I also understood that the difference is not the children, but actually the societies around children, how they react in each place to these kids. And by showing that and showcasing the differences, as an adult, as a tech entrepreneur, or as a businessman or woman, or as a young professional like yourself, one can actually go back to their own childhood and really connect back to these roots of creativity and exploration of the world and tolerance to failure that children have, right?
Sure.
Otherwise they wouldn't walk, because we fell 1,000,000 times before we actually succeeded in walking, right? So that's what Chutzpah is about. It's a story about children and how we as adults can actually learn a lot by these core elements that children around the world possess in common.
There were two really interesting stories that in your book I took away with. One was how parents are sort of parenting on the playground in Israel, how closely they're standing next to the slide to keep their child from falling. And sort of how in Israel, the parents are talking to one another and engaging, and the children are given the freedom to fall off the side of the slide because they'll learn the next time maybe to hold on to the guardrails as they go down. And so it's the freedom to let your children fail. And so I think that is a really interesting sort of early on installation of willingness to fail and willingness to innovate towards a solution and fail along the way so that you get the best result eventually. The other story was, you said or wrote about that there were these standardized tests that were taken by Israeli students and by students from another country, and that the Israeli students, neither student group had really been taught how to answer the problem, but that the Israeli students attempted to find the solution in a whole bunch of different ways, and that the students who had the different educational system all attempted to find the solution in the exact same sort of methodological way. I'm wondering where you think that sort of diversity of path in trying to find that solution really comes from in Israel, because I think that is such an interesting and such a valuable part of the culture that adds to the strength of the startup nation and makes it what it is. And so where does that sort of chutzpah to try something new, to answer a math problem in a different way, come from beyond childhood and the playground setting?
So, I mean, when you think that you actually captured perfectly exactly the messages, and these are real examples. And when you think of the second example that you gave, that I think was around the age of 14 or 15, okay? It is built upon that first example of the playground. Because what's happening in the playground is that, and it's not a strategy, it's not a parenting strategy, we will let our kids fall so they can learn. It's just a much more flexible, I would say, mindset that, yes, there are best practices to a lot of things, including, by the way, there is a best practice of climbing up the ladder, going down the slide. That's the best practice. But in many things, we don't really need to define these best practices and follow them. And in the playground, if we just let the kids, play, they will figure it out by themselves, okay? Now, this then, as these kids grow, they train a muscle, well, several muscles. They train muscles of creativity, of finding ways. They even learn physics by doing that, because they do fall. And they learn, like you said, that it hurts and like the laws of gravity. Okay.
Right.
They also learn to resolve conflicts this way, because instead of us setting a clear set of rules for them, this is do's and don'ts. Okay. The rules are really, really the critical ones. Don't hit your friend. That's a rule. But other than that, just, figure it out. And they learn how to resolve conflicts and then train emotional intelligence from a very young age. All of these muscles, okay, are then fostered and trained, and then you see them eventually later on demonstrated in a math test. Now, does it mean that only people who have trained these muscles from a very young age can do that? No, that's not what I'm saying. Actually, I'm saying the opposite. I'm actually saying that all of us, all around the world, possess these skills. It's like body anatomy. You and I, we live on two different sides of the ocean, but we have the same body anatomy, the same number of muscles, the same number of bones. They're connected in the same way. But then our nutrition, our climate, our even sports we do influences then which muscles we use more, which are neglected, and how we use them. Same analogy. I think people all around the world possess these soft skills. Going back to what I said before about children, it's universal. The question is, are these skills practiced and trained and reinforced, or have they been neglected?
I see.
But with awareness, you can find them in yourself and actually start training them.
So I'm sorry for the call. Following up on the question, what do you hope readers will take away from it? Is there something that people in other countries can do to sort of cultivate these soft skills?
So definitely, yes. The one thing I want people all around the world, and especially young professionals, to take is that anyone, anywhere, not just is capable of becoming, a micro entrepreneur or a big entrepreneur, but actually in today's economical world and looking at the future, must foster these skills. Because whatever you'll do in life, you will need to actually train them. And so to use them. And so this is my message. Anyone, anywhere needs these skills and can actually train them. It's just a matter of awareness. And how to do that, of course, is more complicated, but it's definitely possible. It's training. It's just like going to the gym.
I see. So are people at an inherent bit of a disadvantage when they aren't given that sort of upbringing on the playground, etc. How can people sort of catch up to the Chutzpah culture? You said it's complicated, but I'm wondering if there are like a couple steps that people can do to get the ball rolling towards that sort of innovative mindset.
Yeah, well, the first practical step I'll say is that there's a course called Hootsbo 1-on-1 that they can take, okay,
Gotcha.
and actually really train themselves in that, okay, and I'll send you the links if you want later. But if I have to give one advice, and maybe the most difficult one to actually, implement, but the most important one, is not to look for clear answers. Okay.
Gotcha.
Part of the idea is actually to be extremely flexible and agile and adaptive in your mindset, and to open yourself by that to constant learning. Okay. If you're looking for specific answers and then you think you have the answers, you limit your learning. Okay?
Right.
So really the one bold, tip that I have is to always keep asking questions, just like a 2-year-old, yourself and others, and open yourself to real, learning all the time.
Interesting. So that actually reminds me of sort of a point in the book where you say that you moved to Geneva and it informed your understanding of what Hootsba culture is sort of perceived as by people outside of Israel. You also put forth this concept of balagan, which is like messiness, sort of. Um, I'm curious if you could please elaborate on how it connects to the creative thought process, and then also how it connects to technological solutions more specifically.
So we as as human beings, we tend to think of chaos and mess as negative circumstances. And the reason is because it kind of, it creates, it's not comfortable and it's out of our control, right? But let's take a very simple example. Let's think of your room, okay? Any room of a teenager, my kids, okay? And let's say it's disorganized, okay? Which is often the case of teenagers' rooms, right? So when I tell my kids to rearrange the room, okay, I may think, which is what most people think, is to put everything back in place, back where it was, right? So to organize the chaos or the mess back where things were before. But there's another endless list of ways of organizing that chaos. If only I open myself to the option of not organizing back, putting back in place, but actually in a new order. So for me, balagan, which means mess, which means chaos, is actually an opportunity. And the idea is that in uncertain conditions, in a chaotic situation, yes, we would need to organize the chaos. But why don't we open ourselves to organizing the chaos in a completely new order? Not the way it was before, but something new. I think that with the pandemic and the experience that the world has experienced in the past 3 years now, 2.5 years, we already feel that. We're actually rearranging some of the elements if it's the way we work and the way we study, right? The way we communicate, it's a new order. We're not going immediately back to the way it was. We're actually creating something new. So that for me is the whole concept of mess and balagan. And it's related to technological innovation, because when you think of most of the world-known disruptive, innovations and technologies, they disrupted something. They created a chaos and reorganized things in a new way.
I see. Do you think that there's a difference in how this sort of processing of balagan or chutzpah in general is perceived in women versus men, both in Israel and also outside of Israel?
It's a great question, and I don't have the answer to that because honestly, I did not do research around that specific topic from a gender perspective. So I don't know to quote studies about, women's tolerance to uncertainty or chaos. I have a general feeling that by nature, women are more flexible in mind, and agile, but it's not based on any research that I've done.
Is there a room for chutzpah, of course, in technology, because we're trying to solve modern day problems with technology? How does chutzpah apply to sectors outside of technology?
Perfect question. So it actually, the chutzpah mindset, these muscles, this collection of capabilities, complex problem solving, taking on initiative, emotional intelligence and leadership, all system analysis, all of these capabilities, in my opinion, are, and gladly not just in my opinion, but also the World Economic Forum in their report of the skills for the future actually show how these skills are in growth demand in any industry now, in any profession. So if you'll think, let's take an example of several professions. If you'll think of teachers today, with knowledge becoming more and more accessible, right? And the rapid pace of that access, the role of the teacher completely changes. And with the fact that children are, their bandwidth for concentration and focus today is smaller, for justified reasons, non-justified reasons, it doesn't matter. That's a fact.
Right.
The teacher needs to find different ways of engaging with them, right? So a teacher needs to be a micro-entrepreneur, even in the way they actually provide the content and the knowledge. So that's one example. If you'll think of a physician, when you go today to a doctor's appointment, you will most probably come with more knowledge than my mother came with, okay? Because you've Googled or you have, a general idea, you'll have more questions. The role of the physician has changed. Healthcare systems are completely, being under a revolution now with remote healthcare. So actually, if you have a restaurant today, you need to use technology because you manage the whole inventory from, the inventory to the micro payments. And it doesn't need to be a fancy restaurant. It could be just, I don't know, a juice, a pineapple stand somewhere, okay?
Right.
But so whatever you do, you need to possess and train and cultivate these soft skills within yourself.
Right. I wonder if it applies also to aging within, in the US, we're talking a lot about aging within government and very highly established politicians sort of coming to power late in the game. And I think if they have high levels of chutzpah, then they're able to be innovative and to stay with the times and be open to trying out new solutions. Same with board members of companies as people become ingrained in the, process. If they can stay open to new ideas and new solutions, then their age doesn't really matter, right? Because they can be informed by new ideas coming in.
That's a great angle, a great lens to look at that. And I think and the book does speak about, flat hierarchy. And we see more and more organizations today actually appreciating, right? A diversified conversation is not just about genders. It's not just about general backgrounds. It's also about age diversity. So when you bring together people with experience and they're really open to accept ideas or insights from people with less experience, that can create something incredible together. And I think that's gradually a trend that we see more and more happening. Yes, I could speak for myself. I love working with much younger people than myself because they actually keep me very, sharp.
They're closer to the playground sort of stage.
Yes, exactly. They're less afraid. They're close. They know less, which is good. It's not bad. It's actually good. They know less, so they ask more questions, so that they're more open, okay, to discovering new things in a sense.
Interesting. That actually segues. There's this quote that I came across in an email earlier this week that I'm wondering what your opinion is on. So it goes, "What the wise do in the beginning, the fool does in the end." And it's by Warren Buffett. And so I'm wondering what your sort of interpretation is of the characterization of the wise sort of starting out with the best sort of solution, and the fool gets there eventually, but it takes many different tries. And how that connects to Hootsbo.
I'll suggest a slightly different perspective on that. I'd say the wise actually does not start with a solution. The wise starts with asking a lot of questions and exploring. And through that process of exploration, they learn they get to a conclusion, they reach a conclusion or an insight. And then from that point, finding a solution is more optimal, is clearer. Whereas pull, if you want, may start with a solution. Okay, they've solved the problem, or they think they have, but they've not invested enough time in really understanding the problem. Okay, and so they will need to fix it again and again and again and again and again, and eventually reach the optimal solution. But it will only take them much more time, effort, and resources, because they'll have to correct many more times.
Interesting. I figured you might have something to say about the quote. Super interesting. I mean, I think the trial and error process, if you can streamline it to learning and then solving, makes a lot more sense. And that's sort of what the Chutzpah mentality is the ability to be vulnerable to not knowing.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah. So do
you have a Chutzpah certification?
I still need to take the 101 course. It sounds very interesting. I'm going to follow up with you for the link.
Sure.
But Inbal, do you have any sort of advice for me as a woman that's interested in ICT technology? And then I will relinquish your time back to you for the rest of the day. I'm so appreciative of your sharing it.
I'd say just, have trust in yourself. Okay? Forget all the others, women and men around you. Just trust your own capabilities, follow your dreams and your passions, and I'm sure you can reach whatever you want. Okay, just trust yourself.
I love it. I think, I don't want to make a generalization, but in my own experience, I think that that's something that I wasn't taught as a young girl to do enough of. So maybe I'll write it on a Post-it note, put it on my mirror. Trust yourself. I love it.
Trust yourself. Exactly.
Well, thank you so much again for your time. I'm so appreciative. And the Talking Tech series, I hope, is going to be strengthened by our conversation. So
thank you so much, and good luck.
Thank you. Thanks. Have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye, Inbal.
Shalom.
Shalom.